I didn't think much of it when my mom remarried. I mean, I was already 18, barely a year away from moving out, and the whole idea of gaining a stepfather didn't exactly rock my world. Mark was her age, maybe a few years younger, quiet, put together, the kind of man who knew how to fix a sink and make polite small talk, but didn't try too hard to be a dad. And I appreciated that. We coexisted, cordially. That summer, I came back from my freshman year of college, needing a break from dorm life, from classes, from everything. My mom was happy to have me home, even if just for a couple weeks before I went off to stay with friends for the rest of break. Mark was still working full-time, so we didn't really cross paths much. At least, not until that Thursday night. The house was unusually quiet. Mom had gone out of town with her sister for the weekend, some spa getaway she'd been planning for months. I stayed behind, figuring I'd have the house mostly to myself. I just showered, tossed on some old gym shorts, and shut my bedroom door, ready to scroll my way into a mindless evening. I was lying on my bed, phone in one hand, the other down the front of my shorts. No music playing, just the faint hum of the AC and my own shallow breathing. And then, the door opened. I didn't even hear footsteps. I flinched so hard I nearly dropped my phone. And there he was, Mark, my stepfather, standing in the doorway, halfway through some sentence I hadn't caught. His voice died mid-word the second he saw me. I expected him to look away, to mutter an apology and slam the door shut like any sane person would. But he didn't. Instead, he looked right at me. Not embarrassed, not apologetic, just still. Then, without saying a word, he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. My stomach dropped. He didn't move toward me. He didn't speak. Just leaned back against the closed door, arms crossed, gaze fixed on me with something I couldn't place. Curiosity? Amusement? Something sharper? "Didn't know you were home," he said, voice low. Calm. I cleared my throat, scrambling for the blanket, pulling it over myself like I'd just been caught doing something criminal. I didn't think you were either." He nodded slowly, eyes not leaving me. A beat passed, 2. Then he said, "You want me to leave?" His tone wasn't mocking. It wasn't even teasing. It was too calm, like he already knew the answer. I didn't say anything. And that silence? It hung there, thick and heavy, in a way I still don't know how to explain. He pushed off the door and took a single step forward. The air in the room felt heavier with every second he stood there. I wasn't sure what part of me wanted to bolt and what part wanted to stay absolutely still and just see what he'd do. Mark had always seemed unreadable to me, distant, respectful, never crossing the line. But right now, he was standing on it, toes pressed right up against it. He took another step, and still, I said nothing. "You sure you're all right?" he asked, quieter now, like he was trying not to spook me. I nodded, too quickly. "Yeah, I'm fine." Just surprised, I guess. He didn't laugh, didn't make a joke, just looked down for a second, then back at me. I should have knocked. "Yeah," I said, voice small. "You should have." Another pause. But he didn't open the door. He didn't turn away. Instead, he looked at the bed, at where I sat with the blanket bunched over my lap, and his expression changed. Slightly. Something in his eyes softened. "I didn't mean to interrupt anything," he said. "Right," I muttered, my throat suddenly dry. I expected him to finally leave then. To say his piece, laugh it off, back out of the room, with that careful politeness he always carried. But then he stepped closer again, slow, measured, until he was standing a foot away from the bed. He wasn't towering over me, not exactly. It didn't feel threatening, just close. Too close for a stepfather. Too close for someone who had just seen me like that. I couldn't look away. "You know," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "you've grown a lot since I met you." It sounded like a neutral comment, one a man might say to his stepson. But it didn't land that way. Not when his eyes weren't on my face. "You're not a kid anymore." I swallowed hard. "I guess not." He looked like he was weighing something. like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether or not to jump. And then he said, "Can I ask you something personal?" I didn't answer. Not really. I just nodded, unsure why I was saying yes when everything inside me was tense. Mark's gaze didn't shift. "Was that the first time you've done that in here?" I blinked. My heart slammed once against my ribs. "Why would you ask that?" His voice was steady. "Because the door wasn't locked. I didn't think I needed to." Mark gave a small smile. Not smug, just knowing. "You live with a man," he said quietly. "Even if he's your stepfather." That word should have snapped me out of whatever daze I was in. But it didn't. Because I wasn't just embarrassed anymore. I was curious. And so was he. He didn't move for a moment, just stood there like he was trying to read every inch of me without making it obvious. Then, in one slow motion, he sat down. On the edge of my bed. He sat at the edge of the bed, maybe 2 feet away from me, far enough that we weren't touching, but close enough that I could see the way his shirt clung to the curve of his shoulder. The room was dim, only my bedside lamp casting a soft yellow over everything. It felt like the kind of light that muted sound, that made the whole world shrink to just this room, just this silence. Mark rested his forearms on his thighs, hands clasped loosely. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking down at the floor, like he was thinking about something too carefully to be casual. "I wasn't trying to embarrass you," he said finally. "I really wasn't." "I know," I said, but it came out rougher than I meant. He nodded slowly, like he expected that. "You're not a kid. You've got your own life now. And I shouldn't have come in like that." Another pause. But I saw what I saw. That time my breath caught. I looked away, focusing on the lamp, the blanket, anything but him. "I should have just walked out," he said. But I didn't. He let the sentence hang there, like it explained everything, like it meant something more. It did. Because he hadn't walked out. And he wasn't leaving now. When I finally looked at him, he was already watching me. His face, unreadable again. Calm. Measured. But there was something underneath that calm. Something I hadn't seen in him before. I didn't know if it scared me, or if it excited me, or if I even knew the difference at that point. He looked at my blanket-covered lap for a fraction of a second, then back to my eyes. "You don't have to hide," he said, almost gently. I didn't move. "You mean from you?" "I mean from yourself," he replied. "But yeah, from me too." His voice was low, almost quiet enough to miss. I could barely breathe. I don't know what I was expecting. A lecture, a weird awkward laugh, a demand for me to stop, to be more careful, to grow up. But not this. Not him sitting here, not talking to me like this. I shifted slightly on the bed, not pulling the blanket tighter this time. If anything, I let it drop just a little lower over my thighs. Mark's eyes flicked down. Quickly, but he didn't look away fast enough to hide it. There it was. That flicker, that hesitation. I didn't speak, I just watched him. Waiting. His hands opened, fingers splayed lightly on his knees. "You ever wonder about things?" he asked, his voice tighter now, like the words were harder to pull out. "What kind of things?" I said. He let out a breath. "Things you're not supposed to." The space between us felt smaller now, denser, like it wasn't just air anymore, but heat. I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said. "Sometimes." That was all it took. Mark's shoulders relaxed, but his eyes didn't leave mine. "You think this is one of those things?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe." We were quiet again. So quiet, I could hear the soft creak of the house settling somewhere in the hallway outside. But in here, all I could hear was the thud of my heart and the faint shift of the blanket as I moved. Then, Mark reached out. Not fast, not sudden. Just a slow movement, one hand brushing lightly against my wrist. I didn't pull away. His fingers barely touched me, just the faintest brush against my skin. A light contact that felt like a question more than a move. I didn't say anything, didn't move, just let him hold there, waiting to see what I'd do. But I didn't pull away. Mark's hand shifted, his fingers curling slightly around my wrist, his palm warm against mine. There was nothing aggressive about it, just quiet, deliberate closeness. His thumb moved, slow and careful, tracing along the edge of my hand like he was trying to memorize the shape of it. I looked up at him, and he was already looking at me. There was something in his expression, still unreadable, still calm, but underneath it, something was stirring. I could feel it, just like I could feel the heat radiating off him from where he sat inches away. "This isn't something I planned," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I swear to you." "I know," I murmured. It didn't feel like we were in the same room anymore. Not the one I'd grown up in. Not the one where I'd laid in bed 1,000 nights without anything like this happening. It felt like we'd crossed into some other version of reality, one where time slowed down, and the rules were written in real time. He slid a little closer on the bed. My wrist was still in his hand, now resting between us on the blanket. The touch wasn't tight, wasn't insistent, but it was there, solid and real. I was aware of every millimeter of contact, the way my pulse felt under his fingers. "You're not uncomfortable?" he asked, voice steady. I shook my head. "No. Just surprised, I guess." His lips lifted, not a full smile, just the ghost of one. "Me too," he said. I glanced down at our hands. At the place where his thumb was still moving, slowly, like he didn't want to stop. I wasn't sure how I should feel. There were a dozen emotions tangled in my chest. But underneath all of it was something steady, something quiet and undeniable. Desire. Not rushed, not panicked, just there. Mark let go of my wrist, but didn't move away. His hand settled on the blanket beside mine, close enough that I could feel the edge of his fingers against my skin. "I've never," he started, then stopped, swallowed. "Not like this." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. He looked at me again, and this time the calm was cracked, his eyes searching, raw now. Something had shifted. The mask was slipping. "You ever think about people you're not supposed to think about?" he asked. I knew what he was really asking, and I could have lied. I could have said no. Could have laughed it off, cracked a joke, changed the subject, but I didn't. "Yeah," I said. "I have." Mark exhaled slowly, like something inside him had been holding its breath too. Then, quietly, he said, "I think about you." The words hit harder than I expected. I wasn't even sure what I was feeling. Shock, maybe, or something heavier. But all I could do was look at him, and in that silence, neither of us blinked. Neither of us moved. Until he reached out again. Not to my wrist this time. To my jaw. His hand was warm as it cupped the side of my face. Not rough, not forceful. Just steady, careful. His thumb brushed just beneath my cheekbone, like he was testing whether I'd pull back. I didn't. I couldn't. My body felt locked in place, but not with fear. With something else entirely. His eyes searched mine. Closer now, just inches away, and I could tell he was still waiting for some kind of signal, something in my face to tell him to stop, or maybe something that told him it was okay to keep going. I didn't say anything, but I didn't look away, and that was enough. He leaned in, slow, deliberate. My heart was hammering, but I didn't move, didn't breathe, just let the moment stretch until finally, his lips were on mine. It was a kiss, but not the kind I'd expected. Not rushed, not deep, just real. Gentle. Barely there. His mouth brushed mine once, then pulled back, like he was afraid he'd gone too far. "You okay?" he asked, voice lower now, rougher. I nodded. "Yeah." Mark exhaled, and I saw something soften in him, like tension he hadn't even realized he'd been holding had let go all at once. He leaned in again, slower this time, and I met him halfway. The second kiss lasted longer. It was still careful, still tentative, but this time I responded. I kissed him back, shifting toward him just enough that our knees touched beneath the blanket. When we broke apart, I felt his breath on my lips. "I didn't plan for this to happen," he said again. "I know," I whispered. "I don't even know what it means," he added, shaking his head slightly. I saw you, and I didn't feel like your stepdad. Not in that moment." "I didn't feel like your stepson," I said. "Still don't." That made him pause. We sat like that for a few seconds, the air between us warm, charged. He looked down at where my blanket had slipped slightly again, exposing more of my thigh. He didn't reach for it, didn't adjust it. He just looked, then slowly lifted his gaze back to mine. "You've got no idea how wrong this is," he murmured. "Yeah," I said, "I do." He didn't argue, didn't tell me to stop. He just nodded once, slow and quiet, and leaned in again. This time, he kissed me deeper. His hand slid from my jaw down to my collarbone, the tips of his fingers grazing over my skin in a way that made my breath hitch. My own hands moved without thinking, one gripping the blanket, the other drifting toward his knee, where it hovered for a moment before resting there. We stayed like that for a while, just touching, just breathing. His hand lingered on my thigh, and in the low light I could see his chest rise and fall a little faster. He wasn't pretending anymore. Not to be casual, not to be in control. That calm mask he wore so naturally was slipping, and what was underneath wasn't someone unsure. It was someone who'd been holding back for a long time, and now he wasn't. I sat up a little, shifting so we were more eye level. His eyes didn't leave mine. He was searching for something in my face. Hesitation maybe, doubt, but I didn't give it to him, because I wasn't feeling either of those things. "I've thought about this before," I admitted. His hand paused. "I didn't know what it meant back then, still don't, but I thought about it." He nodded, like he understood. "Same." Then, softer, too many times. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, thick with meaning and the weight of what we were both saying without saying it outright. I leaned in, slowly, testing the air between us. He met me halfway. The kiss wasn't like before. It was deeper this time, hungrier. There was an edge to it, like we both realized there was no going back now. His hands slid from my thigh to my waist, fingers curling lightly against my skin. I felt his grip tighten just slightly, like holding me kept him grounded. I moved too, closer, until our knees brushed, until his breath mixed with mine, until I felt the heat from his chest just inches away, and I wanted more. I let my hand drift to his arm, traced up the muscle slowly. His eyes flicked down to watch me do it, like he couldn't believe it was really happening. Then he stood up. I thought maybe he was pulling away, that he'd come to his senses and walk out. But instead, he peeled off his shirt. He let it fall to the floor like it didn't matter anymore. And then he looked down at me, waiting. I shifted the blanket aside and swung my legs over the edge of the bed, standing to face him. We stood there for a beat, neither of us moving. Then he reached for the lamp. Click. The light disappeared, and in the dark, his hands found my waist again. The dark wasn't total. The hallway light slipping under the door gave us just enough to see outlines. His shoulders, the shape of his jaw, the way his eyes found mine even without the glow of a lamp between us. Everything felt stripped down to sensation. Mark's hand slid up from my waist, slow and deliberate, like he wanted to take his time memorizing the feel of me. My skin burned under his touch, and I felt the pull of something I'd tried to ignore for too long. Not curiosity, not impulse. It was want. I reached for him, my hands on his chest first, the heat of his skin drawing me in. He inhaled sharply through his nose, his body responding in a way that erased any last bit of uncertainty hanging between us. "This okay?" he asked, his voice rough in the dark. "Yeah," I said, barely getting it out. His hands were on my back now, pulling me in just enough that our bodies brushed, skin to skin. He was solid, warm, steady, and nothing like the image of him I'd carried around the house the last few months. This wasn't the man who made coffee in the mornings or folded laundry in the living room while watching the news. This was someone else. Or maybe this was who he really was, and we'd both just stopped pretending long enough to see it. The edge of the bed touched the back of my legs, and he guided me gently down until I was sitting again. He stood over me for a second, looking down like he wasn't sure if this moment was real. Like he expected me to vanish if he blinked. "I keep thinking this shouldn't be happening," he said. I looked up at him. "Then why does it feel like it should?" He didn't answer, just leaned down and kissed me again, slower this time, deeper. His hands slid along my sides, anchoring me to him as I moved back against the mattress. He came with me, hovering just above, his weight a comfort more than anything. There was no panic in our movements, no sense of rushing. It wasn't about crossing a line. It was about finally admitting we'd both been standing at the edge of it for longer than we wanted to admit. The silence was filled with breath, with the faint rustle of sheets, with the soft creak of the bed under the careful rhythm we found between kisses and touch. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. And when it was over, when we both lay tangled in quiet exhaustion, his arm draped over me, fingers tracing lazy circles into my shoulder, I didn't feel guilt or regret. Just stillness. Just us. I don't remember falling asleep, only the warmth of him next to me, the solid weight of his arm resting on my waist, and the way our breaths slowly synced in the dark. The tension that had filled the room just hours before was gone. Not erased, but changed. Muted, like the air had exhaled along with us. I woke up before him. The morning light slipped in around the edges of the blinds, soft and golden, making the room look gentler than it had the night before. Mark's back was to me, one arm still stretched across the bed like he hadn't wanted to let go. I stared at the ceiling for a while, thinking about nothing and everything at the same time. We hadn't talked about what it was. We still hadn't. But I knew I wasn't the only one lying there, feeling like something big had happened. He stirred eventually, rolling onto his back with a quiet sigh. His eyes opened and met mine, no alarm in them, just something unreadable, something real. "You okay?" he asked, his voice still gravelly with sleep. "Yeah," I said. "You?" He nodded. "Yeah." There was a long pause. Then he sat up, running a hand through his hair, glancing toward the door like he'd just remembered where we were and what this all meant now that the sun was up. "Do we need to talk about it?" I asked quietly. He looked over at me. "Probably. But not yet." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Not yet." We didn't say much after that. He got dressed slowly, pulling on his shirt, straightening it in the mirror like it mattered. When he finally stood by the door, he looked back at me like he wanted to say something else, some last reassurance or warning. But all he said was, "I'll be in the kitchen." And then he was gone. The door clicked softly shut behind him. I lay there for a long time after that, staring at the ceiling again, not because I was lost or confused, but because I felt calm, like something had been said without words. Like something that had been building quietly for months had finally cracked open and let itself be real. I didn't know what would happen next. If we'd talk, if we'd pretend it hadn't happened, if it would happen again. But I knew this. When Mark walked into my room last night, I expected embarrassment. I didn't expect understanding. And when he closed that door behind him, it didn't feel like he was shutting something out. It felt like he was letting something in.